Despite being swarming with oozes, the largest trap in the Lakian wastes was the city of Asek. Located in the middle of the harsh desert, Asek was an oasis of respite and comfort, but the facade never lasted for long. The city was run by various dragons, all angling for control of the desperate visitors by catering to their vices. Once a debt had been established, the dragons would send their debtors out to collect treasure for them. The greater the treasure returned, the more magic the warlock received, creating a fearsome competition and dangerous rivalries. It seems that the dragons weren't the only ones hungry for power. Let's start off by addressing the elephant in the room. Fizban's Treasury of Dragons has added a plethora of new draconic flavor to Dungeons & Dragons. There's new dragon spells, there are even new dragon classes if you're playing monk or ranger. But nothing for warlock?
Katie, here you go, one for you. And none for Gretchen Wieners, 5.
Draconic Warlock is free real estate, waiting for any greedy D&D YouTuber to scoop it up. But you'd have to be a real scoundrel, a real scumbag, a real so-and-so to exploit the release of new official material to promote your homebrew. Please join my Patreon. The $5 tier will get you this subclass and all the other ones. Thanks.
Here comes the money.
Warlock is a weird class. It's like a spellcaster, but kind of not. Instead of getting a bunch of spell slots of various levels that you can cast throughout the day, you have less than a handful of spells that all get cast at the highest level that recharge on short rests.
Did you have a nap today? I did! But you need one.
The highest level being 5, of course, and then you start getting spells you can cast once per long rest and only one specific spell per level. Since you can't rely on your big magic all that often, warlocks get access to the best cantrip in the game, Eldritch Blast. It's beams of magic that do damage, and they're magical. That's about it. It's pretty open to interpretation what it actually is. You can power it up further with invocations, which are kind of like warlock exclusive feats that you get as you level up in the class. You can talk to animals, power up your Eldritch Blast, get good at talking to people, power up your Eldritch Blast, cover yourself in flies, or even power up your Eldritch Blast. Whatever you want to do. I'd power up the Eldritch Blast.
More spam!
Subclasses cover a variety of types of bosses you can work for. Archfey tend to give weird instructions, Undead Warlocks lead through intimidation, and the Genie Warlocks have the best benefits package. I'd say the Genie Warlock is also the best justification for why a Dragon Warlock can exist. A common argument against Draconic Warlock is that a dragon can get taken out by a group of like 3 to 4 people, so you could just go kill your patron if you wanted to. But genies are weaker than dragons, so if there's a Genie Warlock, why can't there be a dragon one? Now, Warlock subclasses also give you exclusive spells, though unlike other classes that give you exclusive spells, you do still have to pick them as one of the spells you have prepared. While a Draconic Warlord could serve any type of dragon in existence, the spell list remained the same across dragon types, although it was still very flexible. Like Chromatic Orb, for example, that deals 3d8 acid, cold, fire, poison, lightning, or thunder damage. It didn't necessarily have to line up with the elemental type associated with their draconic patron, although there could be serious consequences if their patron ever found out. Absorb elements let them give themselves resistance to acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder damage as a reaction, and then add a d6 of that damage to an attack they made next round. Considering how often there were draconic rivalries in Asek, having resistance to elemental damage was of paramount importance. Fairly early on, Draconic Warlocks were able to channel their patron's breath with the spell Draconic Breath at the 2nd level. This let them force a dexterity saving throw in a 15-foot cone, dealing 3d6 acid, cold, fire, lightning, or poison damage to creatures who failed, and half as much to those that succeeded. Like virtually every other spell these warlocks cast, it came out of their mouths. Enlarge Reduce gave the warlocks a sense of draconic scale. I'm talking size, not skin. This let them make themselves larger for advantage on strength checks and saves, and to deal an extra d4 of damage with their weapon attacks, or they could make their enemies smaller. Either way, they're going to be towering over their foes. Protection from energy was an upgraded version of Absorb Elements, letting a creature have resistance to acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder damage for up to an hour depending on their concentration. Since warlocks could always cast their spells at the highest level, it was generally better to pop this once you had access to the spell, rather than Absorb Elements and just dealing extra elemental damage that the creature probably resisted. Elemental Weapon added a d4 of acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder damage to weapon attacks made with a weapon, and gave it +1 to the attack rolls to make them more accurate. Not every Draconic Warlock chose Back to the Blade, but those that did loved to cover their weapons with their boss's sauces. Arcane Eye created a floating invisible sensor that the Warlocks were able to see through. If someone were able to see invisibility on the floor of the casinos of a sec, they would understand why the College of Fate bards were unable to cheat, not that it stopped them from trying to cheat. All of this surveillance made Mordenkainen's Private Sanctum a necessary spell. That prevented divination spells, teleporting, and plane shifting in a 5 to 100 foot cube. It took 10 minutes to cast, but casting it every day in the same place for a year made those effects permanent. Sometimes these warlocks would even use these spaces to avoid being seen by their bosses, like a walk-in freezer to cry in. Since their rival warlocks would be using huge area of effect spells, the Draconic Warlocks almost all learned Circle of Power. This gave creatures within 30 feet of them advantage on saving throws against magical spells and other magical effects. Additionally, even when their friendly creatures failed the saving throw, they would take half damage instead of no damage, and no damage if they succeeded. Because this wasn't technically resistance, it could even be paired with another spell like Absorb Elements to really cut down on breath weapon attack damage. Creation was used for various swaps and trades in a sec, creating an item that fits into a 5-foot cube that exists for a shorter and shorter amount of time if it's of rarer and rarer material. Of course, once the object they were trading disappeared, these warlocks would get back at each other's throats with a violent fervor. Of course, there were benefits to becoming a Draconic Benefactor. At level 1, these warlocks learned Draconic. If they already spoke Draconic, they would be trained in another language for diplomacy reasons. Depending on what type of dragon they signed up with, they would get benefits towards a certain type of damage: acid, cold, fire, lightning, thunder, poison, or radiant. A sec was home to fairly rarer types of dragons. These warlocks were able to change the damage of any type of spell they cast to the type associated with their dragon of choice. Even better, they were able to ignore resistance to this type of damage, not immunity, at least not at level 1. They could even use it on a little spell called Eldritch Blast. Maybe you've heard of it?
More spam!
Finally, whenever these warlocks cast a spell, they were able to use somatic components with their hands full as long as they could open their mouths. This meant that they could dual wield weapons, carry objects, or even fire off Eldritch Blast attacks with their hands bound. Needless to say, seeing a spellcaster vomit out powerful magic was intimidating. At the 6th level, this frightful fervor forced a wisdom saving throw on creatures they hit with the type of damage associated with their Draconic Benefactor. If they failed, they would be frightened until the end of the warlock's next turn. Once they had passed this frightening saving throw, they were immune to those effects until they finished a short rest. Frequently, this was paired with the Eldritch Spear invocation and used with Eldritch Blast to keep enemies very, very, very far away. Perhaps as a result of their hands-off approach, the dragons actually became outclassed by their servants. These warlocks honed their breath until it became unstoppable. At the 10th level, Draconic Warlocks gained Empowered Breath, letting them treat immunity to their favorite type of damage as resistance. But if they found someone who was vulnerable to their breath, it would break them in unsuspecting ways. After taking damage from a Draconic Warlock that a creature was vulnerable to, they would have disadvantage on their next saving throw, and creatures attacking them would gain advantage. Vulnerabilities may be rare on higher level foes, but if these warlocks teamed up with someone from Lydia's School of Monsters, they were a truly fearsome duo. The greatest desire of a Draconic Warlord was to become the next boss, but to be the boss, one must be capable of ultimate desolation. At the 14th level, these warlocks were able to send out a 60-foot cone that deals 12d10 of their favorite type of damage. They also got to decide whether creatures inside were making a dexterity or constitution saving throw to get half damage on a successful save and no damage on a failure. Of course, this power was a little taxing, and they would need to finish a long rest before they were able to do it again. So how did the Draconic Warlock's abilities pair with the rest of Warlock? Well, it really pumps up the power of Eldritch Blast, letting you ignore resistances and even immunities later, making the most consistent damage-dealing cantrip even more consistent. But mixing it with Eldritch Spear and Repelling Blast would really help you keep people away using those frightening effects, since they couldn't get closer to you. If you found yourself in the Lakian Wastes, a giant open desert field, people would be dead before they could even see you. The Spirit Shroud spell would pair really well with Eldritch Blast, or let you really sauce up a weapon with more cold or radiant damage if that was the type of dragon you chose. Once you get 5th level spell slots, that extra damage turns up to 2d8 cold or radiant damage against creatures within 10 feet of you. And once you have 4 Eldritch Blasts, that's 4d10 plus 8d8 plus 20 damage in a single round from a cantrip, provided you also have Agonizing Blast. But I'm assuming you take Agonizing Blast. You're a Warlock. It's Eldritch Blast.
You don't say ham, you say spam.
Any of the other Warlock spells that deal damage can get this benefit too, so Blight, Psychic Scream, Finger of Death, Enervation, yada yada yada, resistances aren't an issue for you. And multiclassing isn't an issue for me. Honestly, I might even love it too much. Not surprisingly, the Warlock Dragon mixes very well with the new Dragon Monk and the new Dragon Ranger, since those get regular access to a type of draconic damage. Dipping to Fighter for 2 levels would give you Action Surge, so you could shoot Eldritch Blast twice in the same round. Mix in Sorcerer to get Quickened Spell, and you can Eldritch Blast 3 times in a round. That's 12d10 plus 60 damage in a single round. Pop Spirit Shroud on there too, and you can add 24d8 of cold or radiant damage if that's your preferred draconic type. They're pretty good ones because of Spirit Shroud specifically. Anyway, median rolls with the Spirit Shroud combo, that's over 200 damage in a round with a cantrip. Sorcerer just works really well with Warlock in general. There's just a lot more elemental spells on the Sorcerer list that have bigger areas of effect and bigger damage than Warlock spells. Paladins could use Divine Smite for extra radiant damage if that's the type of damage you chose, though I will say the Draconic Lords of Esek are not famous for loving sharing loyalty with a deity or having rigorous rules for their employees to follow. But don't worry, there are no rules for joining my Patreon. You just have to, well, I guess you have to give me money. At the $5 tier, you get access to the text version of this subclass and all of the other ones I've made so far. At the $1 tier, you can vote for the subclass you want to see next. The Scavenger Ranger is adept at surviving in even the harshest of conditions. Or you could vote for the Bruiser archetype fighter, martial masters who do their best when backed into a corner. If you can't support the Patreon, I get that. Like the video, subscribe for more, and leave me a nice comment, because nice comments help the algorithm even more. Then come back next week for more from the Gilded Coast of Moria.